Welcome back. Gang violence has remained persistent in Cape Town despite the lockdown and the army being deployed. Just last week, 5 people, including a 4-year-old child, were shot and wounded in Hanover Park. The shooting is believed to be related to gang war there. Now, residents say they're desperate for peace. Let's speak to Theodore Petrus about this issue. He's an associate professor of anthropology at the University of the Free State. Thanks for your time, Prof. We appreciate it. This is something that's been plaguing this area for decades, and it still hasn't changed. Why?
Thank you, Shahan, and good afternoon to the viewers. I think the first thing we need to do is we need to place the issue of gangsterism and gang violence in its proper context. So the first thing that I will say is that gangsterism isn't something that has just started. As you quite rightly say, it's been around for decades. But there are also multiple factors that we need to take into account if we want to understand why gangsterism is still an ongoing challenge in many communities. And we need to start by accepting that it is far more than just merely a crime or a law enforcement issue. Because if we want to understand the broad context of gangsterism, we need to look at the historical, social, economic, political, and even cultural dimensions to it. Gangs and gang formations, in whatever form they come, don't exist in isolation. They are part and parcel of communities. And therefore, if we want to understand gangsterism, we need to understand the communities and the dynamics in those communities in which gangs occur. So if gangsterism is continuing, if it's ongoing, despite the best efforts of law enforcement to try and deal with it, then it suggests that the underlying challenges in the communities themselves have not been addressed. And until those underlying challenges, community-wide challenges, are addressed, unfortunately, gangsterism will be an ongoing challenge.
Okay, I get that. But it sounds like people who are struggling to find jobs, etc., are resorting to gangsterism to actually survive. But there are many others, the majority of the population, who still try to make a way legally to overcome their circumstances. It looks like an easy way out for these gangsters.
From the outside, yes. The problem is that the majority of people have options. But the communities that we're talking about where gangsterism is a problem are communities that are characterized by a level of marginality, a level of stigmatization, and the people in those communities, whether it is a real or perceived impression, have limited options in terms of what they are able to do. So if we look at infrastructure, if we look at access to opportunities, employment opportunities, socioeconomic conditions, you will find that in communities where gangsterism is a problem, these characteristics tend to be pretty much the same. And that is why I say that unless we address those core challenges that are impacting these communities negatively, that will continue to have an impact on the ongoing prevalence of gangsterism.
And what about police intervention then? Because I know you say they can't really do much except arrest the criminals, but it's the social circumstances that could lead to us seeing some change. We know that's not going to happen anytime soon because we've been trying to see change in that regard for a while. It hasn't happened. Police intervention, is there any deterrent to gangsters?
That is very difficult to determine at this stage for several reasons. The first one is that, unfortunately, the police service itself is in a state of disarray. We all know about the current problems going on at the highest levels of the police service, and those issues need to be sorted out for the police to be effective in dealing with crime in the country in general, let alone dealing specifically with the issue of gangsterism. And then the second problem also is it has been documented and reported that in many cases police officials themselves are involved with or in league with gang leaders or gang members in these communities. And this also obviously does very little to help the police in their efforts to deal with the problem of gangsterism. And then the third thing that we can also look at is if we look at examples of what's happened in other countries where gangsterism was, where the effort to address gangsterism utilized a paramilitary approach with the police and the army being called in. That actually had the opposite effect. And I'm thinking specifically of the example of the Northern Triangle of Central and South America, where they tried to use what they called iron hand tactics, where the police and the army were called in and were instructed to brutally root out gangsterism in those communities. And it ended up turning the communities into a war zone, and a lot of innocent people ended up getting killed as a result of the gun battles between the military and the police on the one hand and the gangs on the other. So those examples suggest that the approaches that the police have used up until now have not really been all that effective. And it means, therefore, that there needs to be a new way of thinking around how to address the issue of gangsterism. That's why I started by saying that it is not just a law enforcement problem. The police are not going to be able to deal with this challenge on their own. There needs to be a multidisciplinary, multidimensional, multi-level approach and a holistic approach to dealing with the challenge of gangsterism. And unless we start thinking about it in a more holistic way and continue to simply see it, no, it's the police's problem, let them deal with it and sort it out, unfortunately, we are not going to get very far. And if we also remember, we're talking about the Western Cape in this context, where in the 90s, we had the emergence of vigilante organizations like PAGAT that ended up becoming vigilante organizations to deal with crime and gangsterism because they didn't feel that the police were able or equipped enough to be able to deal with the challenge.
Yeah.
So we don't really see a return to that. So before things like that start happening again, it's best that we realize that the police need help, they need assistance, and we need a multi-level approach to dealing with this challenge.
All right, thank you so much for your insight. Appreciate it, Professor Theodore Petrus from the University of the Free State.